than they are in developing and underdeveloped countries. Because in developed countries, the customer can afford to buy the product at a higher price. This doesn't necessarily mean that the exporter, producer, will export the goods below cost, although they may choose to do so. But more often than not, they will just apply a lower margin of profit and then hope with a higher volume of export, it will compensate for the lower margin. Now, I was mentioning there are many reasons, some of them are very valid reasons for price discrimination. Sometimes producers have excess stock, which they want to liquidate. There may be a change in season. They may have, for example, in England, winter has kicked in, so you may have producers, exporters who are left with a stockpile of summer clothes, which they would sell to countries where there's still summer. Sometimes it makes economic sense to dump excess stock abroad rather than to engage into a price war in the domestic market. Sometimes there are perishable goods nearing expiry date, which would warrant the producers dumping their products overseas. There may also be a change in technology, and as a result, the product may have become outdated or obsolete in the domestic market. For example, some cellular phones may no longer be compatible with 4G or 5G network, and those phones are then dumped in less developed countries which still use 2G or 3G network. But very often, unfortunately, the reason why a producer, an exporter, would dump its product is to try to get a market share in the overseas market by bringing down the price at which it is able to sell in the country to which it is exporting at an artificially low level. They become more competitive and as a result get a price advantage over the same product that is locally produced and sold. Now, in some countries, governments even provide subsidies to their exporters to encourage them to export their products at very competitive prices. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, what is wrong with dumping? At the end of the day, customers in Mauritius should be happy if they are benefiting from lower prices. Customers who probably would not have been able to afford to buy such products if they were priced at the same price as they are sold in the local market, will now be able to buy them because the lower price thanks to dumping. Dumping is also likely to bring down imported inflation. It will help our current account. It will also help balance of payment. And it will result in substantial saving of our very precious foreign currency reserve that we use to import these products. So why then are we coming forward with a bill to regulate dumping? The answer, Mr. Speaker, sir, lies in section 16 of the bill. Anti-dumping measures may be imposed on products imported into Mauritius where three conditions are met. Three conditions. First, there must have been an investigation, and the investigation revealed that the product is being dumped in Mauritius. That is, the product is being sold in Mauritius at a price which is less than the price at which similar products are sold in the exporting countries. Second condition, and this is the most important condition, the investigation must have revealed that there is injury to domestic industry. And the third condition, which will link the first two, is that there should be a causal link between the dumped product and the injury to the domestic industry. So it is only when these three conditions are met that the act, the law, enables measures to be taken against the exporter. Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that we don't produce much. We tend to import most goods that we need, most goods that we consume. But our local industry must be protected against unfair competition. For example, sugar. It is very important to protect our cane industry, which remains the backbone of our economy. We cannot allow imported sugar to be dumped. we need to preserve employment in the cane industry. I say cane industry because today we cannot talk only about sugar. We need to talk about the byproducts. We need to talk about bagasse, which is used to generate electricity during the crop season. So we cannot afford to have our sugar factories closed down because people, foreigners, are exporting and dumping their sugar on the local market. Similarly, our textile industry must be protected from exporters dumping T-shirts and other garments. If the price of imported clothes is artificially low, then Mauritians will not buy labeled made in Mauritius. This will affect local production, result in closure of factories, and jeopardize employment in the textile sector. Many small and medium enterprises will require protection against dumping. I have in mind the footwear industry. I still remember a few years ago, there was an outcry when tariffs were removed on imported shoes. Many SMEs engaged in shoemaking business had to close down and employees were laid off. Some industries must also be protected for strategic reasons. For example, Les Moulins de la Concorde, which produces most of our flour which consume locally. Les Moulins de la Concorde needs to be protected against imported flour which may be dumped in Mauritius. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are many reasons why a country would want to impose anti-dumping measures on imported products, which is likely to injure its domestic industry. But at the same time, if a country was allowed to impose anti-dumping measures on all imported goods for no valid reasons, there is likely to be retaliation and a trade war. And we have seen over the years many examples of trade war. And most recently, we have witnessed the cutthroat war between China and the USA, which resulted in tariff imposition in both countries. So anti-dumping measures are a threat, can be a threat to liberal multilateral trading system. And this is where the World Trade Organization steps in. The World Trade Organization does not regulate the action of individual companies engaged in dumping. They are not here to regulate the price at which a company decides to sell its product. Its focus is on how government can or cannot react to dumping. It disciplines anti-dumping measures. And to do so, after a lot of negotiation between member states, the WTO has come up with what is often called the Anti-Dumping Agreement. The correct title, in fact, is the Agreement on Implementation of Article 6 of the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade 1994, the GATT. This agreement governs the application of anti-dumping measures by members of the WTO, including Mauritius. According to that agreement, a country can impose anti-dumping measures only after it has carried out an investigation and has determined that an imported product is dumped and that dump import is causing material injury to a domestic industry producing like product. This is what is reproduced in Section 16 of the bill. The anti-dumping agreement of WTO sets forth certain substantive requirements that must be fulfilled in order for a country to impose anti-dumping measures, as well as detailed procedural requirements regarding the conduct of anti-dumping investigations and the imposition and maintenance in place of anti-dumping measures. A failure to respect either the substantive or procedural requirements can be taken to dispute settlement and may be the basis of invalidation of the measures. Therefore, the bill today before the House largely reproduces the provisions of WTO anti-dumping agreement, and we have absolutely no issue with most of these provisions, Mr. Speaker, sir. For example, the bill provides guidelines as to how the normal value of dumped product is to be determined. This can be particularly tricky where you don't have comparables, where you don't have a local market with which you can compare the prices. If, for example, a country producing a certain mobile phone is dumping those phones in Mauritius because they don't sell it in their own country because of change of technology. In this situation, it would be difficult for Mauritius to get comparable data, but the bill will provide a mechanism of cost-plus margin to determine the price which would otherwise be payable in the country of manufacturing. The bill also provides guidelines as to how to determine whether dumping is causing injury to the local industry. This is in part 5 of the bill. The basic requirement for determination of injury is that there be an objective examination based on positive evidence of the volume and price effects of dump imports and the consequent impact of dump imports on domestic industry. And finally, the bill sets out the factors to be taken into consideration to establish the causing link between the dump product and the injury to local industry. This is in section 33 of the bill. The bill reflects the provision of the WTO anti-dumping agreement with regard to conduct of investigation, who can trigger such investigation, the duration of the investigation, and the publication of the conclusion of the investigation. And in the light of the determination of the investigation, the Minister of Finance may impose ad valorem or specific duty on the dump product pursuant to section 94 of the bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm glad that the bill makes provision for any party that is dissatisfied with the final decision of the minister or authority to apply to the Supreme Court for a judicial review of the decision in accordance with section 115 of the bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is all well to have a bill which complies with GATT, WTO anti-dumping agreement. But as my good friend Honorable Arvin Boulel likes to say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the responsibility to properly implement this bill will fall on the shoulders of the Trade Remedies Investigating Authority, which is established in section 7 of the bill. And this is a welcome measure. Previously, under the existing law, there was an investigating authority, but it was a one-man army. The investigating authority was actually the Director of Trade Policy in the International Trade Division of the Ministry. So now, with this bill, we are going to have a proper authority. And I'm glad that unlike the statutory bodies and public bodies which has recently been voted and debated in this House, this time around, the chairperson and vice chairperson will not be designated by the minister. I think this is a very positive thing. The chairman will be the Director of Trade Policy, which is already the case, will be appointed by PSC, and the vice chairman will be designated by the financial secretary. And here I don't know why it should be the financial secretary who is involved in the appointment of the vice chairperson, the vice chairman. Why shouldn't that be left to the PSC, as is the case for the chairperson? Mr. Speaker, sir, in order to carry out its statutory duties and conduct the required investigation, the authority must be properly staffed and have the necessary budget. This is a highly technical field, and we need highly trained personnel, well-versed in pricing and analysis. And I hope that the government will put the necessary funding at the disposal of the authority as and when required to conduct its investigation. Mr. Speaker, sir, I can only hope that the authority lives up to the expectations, because if they do not act properly, it is Mauritius as a whole who will be taken to task at the level of WTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Today, I rise in support of the Trade, Anti-Dumping, Countervailing and Safeguard Measures Bill presented by my colleague, Honorable Alam Ganu. This bill, the aim is to protect the domestic industry against the negative effects of dumped, subsidized and increased import as spelled out in the explanatory memorandum. Mr. Speaker, sir, Mauritius is an open country which is fully integrated into the global trading landscape. It is an export-oriented economy with international trade, that is imports and exports, making up for almost 100% of GDP. Openness to international trade has been among the strategies and pillars which has contributed to the development and progress of the country. Mauritius is building and strengthening regional and multilateral cooperation. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the Free Trade Area between Mauritius and China, the Comprehensive Economic and Cooperation and Partnership Agreement between Mauritius and India, and the United Kingdom and Eastern Southern Africa Economic Partnership Agreement constitute major bilateral and multilateral agreements offering vast possibilities to Mauritius to export goods and services globally and vice versa. It is, however, important that competition from foreign imports is not unfair and puts into jeopardy the local industry and especially the MSMEs. Imposing anti-dumping and countervailing measures become important duty to protect the domestic industry as well as employment. In parallel, government is also promoting import substitution measures and local production for increased food security. Industries and enterprises, some of which are nascent, engaging in these activities have to be protected from imported products. Mr. Speaker, sir, boosting local production and import substitution is of paramount importance in a world which is becoming extremely uncertain and risky. The COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which have negatively impacted trade and living in terms of rising freight costs, rising cost of raw materials, and disruptions in supply chain are just a few examples. Fears of a global recession and inflation are also looming. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me take the House through some statistics pertaining to SMEs. It may be noted that as per the Census of Economic Activities 2018, the number of small production units was estimated at more than 139,000. The total gross output of the small units was estimated at around 189 million rupees. The units were mainly engaged in wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, 34%, transportation and storage, 16%, manufacturing, 13%, construction and accommodation and food service activities contributed around 10% each. The total number of persons engaged in the small units was around 330,000. In 2020, the share of SMEs to total employment was 44%, while contribution to SMEs to gross value addition, 34.9%. Contribution of SMEs to total domestic exports stood at 10.3% in 2020. A level playing field is all the more important as smaller companies are especially vulnerable to unfair competition. This depicts the importance of this bill in favor of SMEs. Mr. Speaker, sir, this bill proposes the establishment of the trade-related investigating authority, which will act as a watchdog to investigate on suspicious cases of dumping or subsidized imports. The setting up of this authority is in itself a grand premiere in the protection of our local industry against unfair competition from imported products in the form of dumped and countervail products. It is not a secret to anyone that some imported products are available at less than their cost price and are flooding the Mauritian market at the expense of our local products. It had become more than important to keep these malpractices in check and to curb them so as to promote fair competition. We are not against the spirit of competition, but competition should be sound and competition should benefit one and all, and in particular the customers. As the saying goes, trade is free, but it should be fair as well. Mr. Speaker, sir, government is making available all the necessary resources to support our SMEs and local industry to recover and to tread anew on the path of growth after the successive shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. These events would have had catastrophic consequences on businesses, employment, and families had we not intervened promptly. All our efforts for recovery face high risk from imported, dumped, counterfeited, and countervail products. With this bill, we can ensure our businesses and local industrialists that any reported cases of dumping and countervailing will be duly considered and dealt with within the provisions of this bill. It is our conviction that our MSMEs and our local industry will feel more secure and more protected and will venture into new investment, manufacturing, and trade. They will be more confident to embrace new opportunities, knowing that the Trade Remedies Investigating Authority will act as a watchdog and refer all cases of dumping and countervailing to the appropriate government of countries for a remedy. I also note that the bill makes provision for like products, which are also called Me Too products, in international marketing, where counterfeit products could be imported and sold similar to the original ones. This bill also makes ample provision so that the local production is not penalized, especially when there is a market difference between the buying price of the local product and the like product. Mr. Speaker, sir, when the bill provides for particular market situation, it is basically talking about production whose prices at the world market are relatively low, but at the same time are of lower quality. Thus, these commodities could enter Mauritius and we could ultimately be having a quality hazard. It is a known fact that when countries are dumping their products in Mauritius, they are in fact selling at a lower than their cost of production, and they will pave the way so that the quality is compromised. The bill is going to reinforce our protection against heavy dumping from traditional markets, especially post-COVID-19, where they have a huge inventory, which in some cases could be nearing expiry dates. The establishment of the Trade Remedies Investigating Authority will go a long way towards in providing the necessary check and balances, and I'm happy to note that this authority will be manned by a professional of high level from the ministries. And on the board also, I have noted there is one representative from my ministry. There is provision to guarantee that the issues in front of the authority will be dealt in the prescribed time frame under the bill. Additionally, I take note with pride that anti-dumping or countervailing investigation need not be market-driven, but the authority can initiate any investigation based on the information available to it. To bring transparency to the investigation, the final determination of any investigation, be it anti-dumping or countervailing, will be gazetted in 1 year of initiation of the investigation. This is going to ensure the transparency of the system. Mr. Speaker, sir, to ensure that the anti-dumping or countervailing investigations are on the right path, a clear-cut line of not less than 60 days and not more than 250 days will be the guiding principles to have a preliminary determination of investigation well before 1 year, which in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a very innovative step towards transparency. The legislator has shown its good intention in this bill by providing in very explicit terms for consultations with governments of countries which could have an interest in an investigated product and at the same time come up jointly with proposed safeguard measures. As you are aware, the manufacturing sector is an important pillar for generating economic growth and development of the country. It accounts for some 13% of gross value addition and around 15% of total employment. The manufacturing sector is essentially driven by three groups of operators, namely export-oriented enterprises, non-export-oriented enterprises, and SME manufacturers. There are around 232 export-oriented enterprises, 326 non-export-oriented enterprises, and 18,200 registered SMEs with a combined workforce of some 85,000 persons. During the past 5 decades, the sector has adapted to evolving market requirements through its increasing capacity to compete on the international front. The manufacturing sector has also demonstrated its resilience, particularly during the pandemic, whereby local manufacturers have played an important role by catering to the immediate needs of the country. Here, it is important to emphasize that the development of a robust local industry is high on government's agenda. In fact, a lot of efforts is being geared to stimulate local production and assist manufacturers through a host of support measures. Mr. Speaker, sir, this trade bill comes at an opportune time as it provides the necessary enforcement mechanism to confer the much needed protection to our domestic industry. Government is fully conscious of the predicament constantly being faced by our local entrepreneurs in upholding their manufacturing activities in a precarious business arena. As responsible policymakers, we shall leave no stone unturned to 1. Protect local enterprises from serious injury caused by a sudden increase in imports of any product. 2. Discourage the importation of foreign goods at prices well below domestic prices. And 3. Safeguard employment in the manufacturing sector. Additionally, the trade bill comprises important clauses 15 to 26 and Part 3 relating to dumping matters, as well as clause 27 under Part 4, whereby provisions have been made for the imposition of countervailing measures in a bid to prevent injury to domestic industry. Members of the House will agree with me that importation of products at a cheaper price than our locally manufactured ones will undoubtedly bring serious harm to our domestic industry, at worst leading to closures. Allow me to elaborate. Dumped imported products jeopardize the very existence of our domestic businesses due to a drop in sales leading to plummeting turnover. This in turn has a domino effect, putting at risk the livelihoods of our employees and subsequently impacting adversely on the economy of the country. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is a known fact that local enterprises are very susceptible to negative impact of influx of imported commodities. Therefore, Clause 34 and 35 under Part 6 of this trade bill provides for safeguard measures to protect our domestic industry. I am confident that our captains of industry will heartily welcome this new provision on safeguard to sustain their business continuity and to buffer against trading shocks. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to admit that there is uncertainty about the future of the global economy caused by those long-term impacts of the pandemic and geopolitical shifts. We are also conscious that the global trading system is in need of reform and renewal of free and fair trade values in the midst of climate change. So to face up these challenges, we need to devise our strategies with optimism, dynamism, clarity of purpose, and hope for a better economic landscape where our enterprises thrive. This bill will certainly go in this direction. I have no doubt that we will forge stronger trading relationships, put rocket boosters under our exports, break down barriers to market access, but more importantly, protect our local industry. Our task is now to capitalize on our strength and level up our country with the energy, innovation and engagement of businesses and the ambitious strategies of the government. We will unleash our nation's brilliant potential and write a new chapter in our proud trading history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have listened. Yes?
Shakil Abdul Rajak Mohammed.
Yes, sir. That's me. Thank you. Présent. Mr. Speaker, I've listened very carefully to the intervention of the previous orator, that of the Honourable Minister. I did not expect him to say anything less than to congratulate the Honourable Minister, Ganu, for this piece of legislation. I did not expect him to say anything less than to say that, and to use his terms, that this piece of legislation would unleash, what did he use the term, rocket booster, as though the ills of the industry, or one of the ills of the industry, the captains of industry, was the fact that we did not have such a good legislation as the one that's being proposed. When you listen to members of government, you have the impression that this is the solution to a lot of the ailments of the industry, and that exports would be boosted by the introduction of this piece of legislation. When you listen to members of government, this is the solution to increase production and exports and make sure that the country gains in terms of revenue through sales, through exports. There is nothing further from the truth. Nothing further. I think it would be advisable to tell the people the truth, that there is indeed the need to update our legislation of 2010. I agree. But there is also the need to complete the truth by saying that this legislation that we had in 2010 needed to be updated because of consultations that have happened at the level of the WTO, where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our able diplomats were present, including the presence of Honorable Ganu, who has had consultations at the international level, at the level of WTO, where a consolidated piece of legislation was, in fact, being suggested and welcomed by the WTO. It had to be introduced as far back as 2021. We are in 2022. Nevertheless, the intention of the legislator here is a good one. However, let us not sell dreams to the Mauritian public, as the previous orator has tried to do. Let us not try to pretend, as I had started out by explaining, that the wrong was in lacunas of the previous legislation, or to be more precise, the actual legislation that is about to be a previous one. When one analyzes the words of Honorable Ganu, I recall that he has said in his opening remarks, he has referred to various differences between the actual legislation and the bill. And one of the things that he said at the very outset was that the actual legislation did not allow the authority to investigate on its own accord. The Honorable Minister went as far as to say that it was not possible by law for the actual authority under the actual piece of legislation to investigate on its own initiative, but could only do so if and only if there was a complaint that was made. There is also the first point where I humbly disagree with the Honorable Minister. It is not true to say what he said. It only suffices to simply read the actual legislation, and specifically Section 24 of the actual legislation, to come to an understanding. But it is also important to read Section 73, Mr. Speaker. But the Honourable Minister has limited his reading to only one section. And what is the section that he referred to? He referred to the application by domestic industry. He referred to Section 24 of the actual legislation that says an investigation under this part may be initiated by the investigating authority upon receipt of a written application by or on behalf of a domestic industry. Because of this section of the law in Section 24(1), the Minister is of the view that there was the need to amend this legislation, and one of the stark differences is that the actual legislation did not allow an investigation on their own initiative. I say it again, wrong. Because when one reads Section 73 of the actual legislation, and it should never be that we read only one section, let us read Section 73, and I'm happy to note that the orator who will address this National Assembly after me is also a lawyer, as the actual minister, and will be able to have an enlightened debate about what I'm putting forward. Section 73 says, the investigating authority, I quote, the investigating authority shall, in addition to any specific duty vested upon it by this Act, A, investigate any allegation or suspicion or dumping or subsidized imports, 1, either on its own initiative or on receiving a complaint or information which gives rise to such allegation or suspicion. The law as it is, Mr. Speaker, provides that this Trade Remedies Authority, if I may call it that way, had the authority by law to investigate on its own initiative. Therefore, I invite the Honourable Minister to correct what he said when he advanced and made the affirmation that this was not possible under the actual law. I am not inventing anything, I'm simply reading what the law said. Est-ce que c'était possible sous l'actuelle loi pour que l'autorité puisse commencer une enquête on its own initiative? Answer, yes. Section 73 says so. So the question, therefore, is, why did the Honourable Minister say that it was not possible? And that leads me to another thing that the actual Minister said. He said that since 2010, there has been not a single investigation. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, not only have there been members of Parliament in 2010 who came up with the legislation that was in line with the rules of GATT, that members sat here of all parties, government and opposition, back in 2010 and enacted a piece of legislation, that you had a speaker that presided over the debates. But how shocking et révélateur of the state of our democracy that we had a beautiful piece of legislation and those who were empowered to carry out what had to be carried out under that law never even investigated into anything for 12 years. So not only is it the blame that of one political party, we are all, therefore, political parties who have been in power between 2010 and 2022, guilty of some wrongdoing somewhere. We cannot, therefore, say it is not I, but it was you. But for once, at least, let us admit we are all to blame. We have a shared responsibility. We've messed up, haven't we? Because for 12 years, you have a piece of legislation that's on the books, not one investigation. And then governments are going to come forward and say, we are here to protect the interests of the people and the consumers. We are here to rocket boost production in the industry and SMEs. This, what Honorable Minister said before me, it could come from the mouth of a member of the Labour Party in order just to rouse sentiment in favor of the party. But this, it comes in the mouth of a man of the MSM just to raise sentiment in favor that the MSM government is the best and nothing else. Bis repetita. You've done it, we've done it. But when are we going to stop and realize that for 12 years, we don't have a single report that this assembly has been provided with to know an audit of the SME sector? What are the sectors that have been affected or can be afflicted by dumping? We're talking about dumping, anti-dumping legislation. What are the sectors? My friend Yutim has talked about sugar. Has there been a report produced, commandité, for the sugar sector to investigate whether we can and how, in what manner we could be, our sugar producing sector could be affected by dumping in our country? Have we had such an investigation carried out by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade? If so, where's the report? Has a report been carried out by any ministry under any government to try to see that there is some problem with regard to SMEs, fishing industry? I'm looking at my good friend, the minister of that particular sector. Have there been an investigation under the previous government, the one before that? We talk about GATT ever since what, the 80s, 1984? So therefore, this agreement since 1984, not a single government has even managed to carry out commandité un rapport pour voir where and how we could be, in what sector be victims of dumping. And now we are talking about legislation. What does that show us? Friends on both sides, what does it show us? It shows us that we are very good at passing laws, but we are lamentable as far as enforcement of a law is concerned. And I said we, as a country. So what are we doing today? We are sitting down passing another piece of legislation that in fact the main power existed back in 2010. But in order to cover incompetence, to cover lacuna by those who were in power at different moments in history, to ensure that this ministry functioned, to protect SMEs as they deserve to be protected, there's been nothing else but talk, talk, and talk, and there has been action that is zero. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, sir, not in simply voting a law. A law is this beautiful print. We could choose another font. What does it make? Nothing more. But allow me at least to say, yes, I agree with Honorable Yutim, that this piece of legislation is in line with the provisions of GATT, Article 6. Yes, we all know that. So where does that take us? Allow me also to state to the Honorable Minister, why is it that it is only public functionaries that have to form part of that committee? Why? Why is it that there is a section in that particular law that talks about disclosure of interest? Look at the section that talks about disclosure of interest, Section 11, Article 11. But when you read the title, it says disclosure of interest. Read now. There's only one section, 3A, that says immediately and fully disclose that interest when it appears to the chairperson and vice chairperson or member of the authority that a matter before him concerns his financial or personal interest. When it appears, this is very weak. Allons comparer ce qui peut être comparé. Let us learn from other countries. The Trade Remedy Committee of the United Kingdom also exists to do the same job. But why is it under their legislation? I opened it a few seconds ago, Mr. Speaker, sir, on my telephone. I opened it, my telephone, and I went to look at the www.gov.uk, the TRA, Trade Remedies Authority, the board register of declared interest, online, each of every single member, not limited to people who are public functionaries, because they are not supermen. It is impossible for public functionaries, financial secretary, chairperson of another ministry, who will be able to deliver the goods when they have already goods that they are unable to deliver. There are only 24 hours in a day, and none of them will work overnight. It's impossible, it's inhuman to expect them to do it. Why is it in the United Kingdom it's not like that? And why is it in the United Kingdom, when I open my telephone, Mr. Speaker, sir, I note that Simon Walker, I read here, a member of the board, source of remuneration. They talk about all his sources of remuneration. What are his interests? Houses, land and building, where he has property. Every single member, related party interest as well. It's referred here. Every single member. At all times, this has to be updated by law. And why is it that when you read the Freedom of Information Act in the United Kingdom, one of the authorities that has to comply with the Freedom of Information Act, Part 6 of Schedule 1 of the Freedom of Information Act, is precisely that particular trade committee. And why is it in Mauritius that we use beautiful font en caractère gras, disclosure of interest? Mais seulement, c'est seulement when it appears to the chairperson, vice chairperson, or member of the authority. And if it doesn't appear, it's not his fault. So the test, is it objective or subjective? This appearance. I'm here to debate about the inability of successive governments to open up government and to make it more transparent. This is the subject of the debate. The inability for successive governments to understand that we need to make things more transparent. Disclosure of interest is important, not simply when it appears to someone that it is important, because it is a duty of every person on any such committee to, on permanent basis, be accountable for what he does, and they have to have visibility in the members of the public. This principle should apply to all sectors of government. And yes, it wasn't also like that when I was in government. Does it mean that I was also right and you are also right today? Or does it mean that I was also in the wrong and maybe you should try to do better? This is not me trying to give lessons to anyone, because I haven't got ability to do so. I know as little as everyone does, but together we can share our ideas. Together we can make things better. So my aim here, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to use my knowledge, the little that I have, identify lacunas that have existed even under the old legislation. But it is a society full of madness if we are to repeat mistakes of the past, knowingly. Those are my submissions. Those are my observations. Thank you, sir.
Honorable Kalicha.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, sir. First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to intervene on this bill today. And allow me at the same time to congratulate the Honorable Minister Alan Ganu. The bill before the House today, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a very important one. The proposed bill, which is an enhancement of the existing Trade, Anti-Dumping and Countervailing Measure Act 2010, will, Mr. Speaker, sir, inter alia, protect the domestic industry against the negative effect of dump and subsidize imports by enhancing the legal framework for the imposition of anti-dumping, countervailing, and safeguard measures. These provisions, which regroup all the trade measures under a single umbrella, are intended indeed to protect the domestic industry from injury from the surge in imports. Mr. Speaker, sir, during consultations, the local manufacturing industry and the private sector have highlighted that they welcome the introduction of this new bill, since it will, amongst others, introduce new trade policy tools that will allow the government to take remedial actions against import which are causing or threatening to cause material injury to the domestic industry. Mr. Speaker, sir, dumping is a practice of exporting goods at below market cost in the domestic market, often with the intention of weakening competitors. It is no secret that some governments have heavily subsidized their local industries with a view to make their export price beyond reasonable competition. This system allows those industries to export at prices well below what merchant producers can match in an open market or have difficulty to compete with. And as a result, this has negative impacts, be it in the short term and in the long term. As a matter of fact, in the short term, the swamping of the market with below price goods deprives local industry of the ability to function normally, costing massive job losses due to the fact that local firms face huge difficulties and are unable to compete with big foreign companies, which are often targeting to monopolize local industries of small economies. On the other hand, in the long term, once a local manufacturer has been driven out of business by uncompetitive prices, foreign producers will invariably raise their prices as they are free to enjoy a market monopoly, thereby removing any benefit to the consumers. Consequently, consumers who think they are better off during the short term end up losing much more in the long run. Mr. Speaker, sir, dumping is a global problem. It is worth underlining also that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has increasingly been calling out predatory countries engaged in continuous dumping practices. One important consequence of dumping which needs to be understood is that worldwide thousands of workers lose their job due to unfair competition through dumping by companies from foreign nations. For example, since 2006, there have been significant job losses in Australian aluminium industry, with employment in that particular industry falling by 44%, and significant job losses also in the Australian steel industry due to dumping. Over the recent years, Mr. Speaker, sir, it has been proved that the issue of dumping has had a deep effect on the world, and Mauritius is no exception. As a result, government, as a responsible government rather, we cannot allow such a situation to arise here. And this bill demonstrates our strong commitment and continued effort to bring transformative changes in the overreaching legal framework which regulates the import and export of Mauritius. We on this side of the House do not want the Republic of Mauritius to face the same negative consequences that many countries have been experiencing. allowing dumping to happen without putting in place the necessary protection nets through regulations could fragilize and jeopardize the Mauritian economy, which, let us not forget, has just started recovering from the adverse effect of COVID pandemic and still facing the consequences of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, sir, these aspects must be looked into since Mauritius is a net importer and relies heavily on importation. For instance, in 2021, our main imports were from China, amounting around 17.7% of our total import, followed by India representing some 15.6%. Therefore, it is prime concern for this government to provide an appropriate regulatory framework in order to maximize benefit from import and export, and in keeping the government's objective of moving towards bilateral, regional, and multilateral trade liberalization. Mauritius has indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, signed various agreements. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the China Free Trade Agreement, the Interim Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union, bilateral agreements with Turkey, Pakistan, and Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, just to name a few. Recently, Mauritius has also signed an agreement with India under the name of Comprehensive Economic Cooperation and Partnership Agreement, commonly known as SECPA. The SECPA will provide improved goods access to market of both countries, leading to stronger value chain between our two countries. Our strategic partnership with India culminated in the signature of this landmark agreement, which is the first of its kind signed by an African country. Although much is being done at this level in order to improve competition, Mr. Speaker, sir, we must also prevent unfair and deceptive trade practices like dumping and subsidized import that can endanger our local industry. Mr. Speaker, sir, the existing legislation only provides for the introduction of anti-dumping and countervailing measures, while the new trade bill before the House introduces legal provisions for the imposition of safeguard measures and thus provides the complete set of trade remedies to protect the local industry. Safeguard measures, in a nutshell, are mostly designed to protect the domestic producers against the onslaught of increased import and as such acts as a safety valve mechanism. Safeguards can be introduced in the form of tariff, quota, or tariff quotas. It is to be recalled that the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade and the World Trade Organization, to which Mauritius is a party, have considered it vital to adopt instruments such as anti-dumping, countervailing, or safeguards in order to ensure that appropriate measures are adopted to protect our local industry from unfair competition. The aspect of the unforeseen development, the effect of any obligation incurred on any product being imported is such increased in quantities and under such conditions that can cause threat to domestic producers like or directly competitive products are determinant that many may encourage safeguard measures. Safeguard measures will also give the possibility for emergency measures to be introduced in case of surge in imports of specific product until the completion of the investigation where such imports have caused or threatened to cause serious injury to the local industry. According to the bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, safeguard measures shall be imposed for an initial period of 4 years, and the total period of application of safeguard measure and any extension shall not exceed 10 years. This will allow domestic industry to adjust and strengthen their market to become more competitive. In the same vein, Mr. Speaker, sir, a safeguard measure shall be imposed where there has been a significant increase in imports and when the increase in import was caused by development that were unforeseen at the time Mauritius concluded its World Trade Organization concessions. Mr. Speaker, sir, this new legislation will not discriminate against developing countries as long as its share of imports of the investigated product into Mauritius does not exceed 3%, provided that the developing countries with less than 3% import share collectively account for not more than 9% of the total import of the investigated products. However, where a developing country excluded from the application of safeguard measure increases its export subsequent to the imposition of a safeguard measure, imports from such country shall immediately become subject to a safeguard measure of its import increase to more than 3% of the import share during the original investigation period. This measure will further protect local industries from unfair competition, Mr. Speaker. As a small island development state, we are confronted by a number of challenges and vulnerabilities. We are exposed to climate change, natural and environmental disasters, such as cyclones, torrential rains, and flash flood. These not only pose great threat to our economy, but impede on our capacity to ascertain sustainable production and consumption. To make things worse, we are being acutely affected by the economic impact of COVID pandemic and the negative consequences of the war, as I mentioned earlier. But in the face of such vulnerabilities, it is very legitimate for us to assist our already fragile local industry by means of carefully targeted measures aimed at protecting our domestic industry. This bill provides for temporary import relief through government intervention by means of a set of measures such as duty, tariff, and quota, specifically when an industry has been injured. When a domestic industry is injured, it not only faces reduced revenue, but jobs of our local employees are also at risk. This can ultimately result in high rate of redundancy in the local workforce and cause devastating ripples effect not only on the economy but the lives of individuals dependent on our local industries. Argument for the protection of our local industry therefore bear true economic and social merit. Mr. Speaker, sir, the introduction of quotas will not only protect our local industries, but also its workforce. This bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, makes provision for quota to be imposed in such situation. The administration of the quota will be under the responsibility of my ministry, following thorough and intensive investigation exercise carried out by the investigating authority. As regard to the investigation itself, the new bill provides for the establishment of a structured trade remedies investigating authority with representatives of various ministries and agencies. It is worth highlighting here that the functions, mandate, and staffing requirements of the investigating authority have been clearly spelled out, hence ensuring transparency in investigating any allegation or suspicion of dumping, subsidized imports, or an increase in import for remedial action. Furthermore, the bill provides for a detailed methodology for investigation and determining the impact or threat of increased import on the domestic industry, including loss of market shares. In determining serious injury or threat of a serious injury, the investigating authority shall evaluate all relevant factors of an objective and quantifiable nature having a bearing on the situation of that industry. In particular, the rate and amount of the increase in imports of the product concerned in absolute and relative terms, the share of domestic market taken by increased imports, changes in the level of sales, production, productivity, capacity utilization, profits, losses, and employment. In addition to the factors set out in this bill, the investigating authority shall consider whether there has been a significant price undercutting by the import as compared with the price of the domestic like product, or the effect of such import is otherwise to depress prices to a significant degree or prevent prices increase, which otherwise would have occurred to a significant degree. For instance, Mr. Speaker, sir, the investigating authority shall demonstrate that the increased import have caused or threatened to cause serious injury to the domestic industry. The causal link between the increased import and the injury to the domestic industry shall be based on an examination of all relevant evidence before the investigating authority. The authority shall examine any known factors other than the increased imports which at the same time are injuring the domestic industry, and the injury caused by these factors shall not be attributed to the increased imports. The factors considered during the investigation shall also include contraction in demand or changes in the pattern of consumption, trade restrictive practices of competition between the foreign and domestic producers. The Act also provides for self-initiation of a safeguard investigation where the authority may, on its own initiative, start a safeguard investigation without having received a written application or on behalf of that domestic industry. Mr. Speaker, sir, to conclude, this bill will not only protect our industry from dumped imports or subsidized imports, it goes further by providing a complete set of trade remedies which can be used in case of unfair trade practices by third countries and increase in import causing material injury to the industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I shall try not to repeat the points raised by my honorable friends from both sides of the House, and I shall try to take novel points that have not yet been canvassed in this bill, which, in my humble opinion, is not a novel approach to anti-dumping system to be introduced in Mauritius. It is a welcome approach to build up on what we have already achieved in 2010 when we have enacted the 2010 legislation. But in a way, this bill consolidates that what we already have in 2010. Treaties that we've got more provisions with regards to the way investigations will be conducted. But the gist of the bill is the same spirit that was embedded, that is still embedded in the 2010 bill. And this leads me to what WTO says all about, because this is the backbone of this legislation, this is the backbone of this bill, and this is the backbone of the 2010 Act. Mr. Speaker, the World Trade Organization is responsible for determining and administering internationally agreed principles and rules for managing dumping issues, as well as for providing a dispute settlement mechanism. Two agreements provide the basis of our country's anti-dumping system, hence the relevance of this bill, as it was also the case in 2010 with the coming into force of the present Act. The two agreements, Mr. Speaker, the agreement on implementation of Article 6 of the General Tariff and Trade 1994, the anti-dumping agreement, prescribes rules for the conduct of anti-dumping investigations and the application of measures to address dumping, including how member countries may initiate cases, calculate dumping margins, determine injury, enforce remedial measures, and review past determinations. And the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures, that we call the Countervailing Measures Agreement, regulates measures designed to remedy material injury caused by subsidized imports along similar lines to the anti-dumping agreement. These two principles, Mr. Speaker, embody the agreements into our legislation. That is the current one, the 2010, and now the new bill. And in the same way as in 2010, Mr. Speaker, the definition of dumping was well defined. So dumping is said to have taken place where an exporter sells a product to Mauritius at a price less than the price prevailing in its domestic market. And Clause 15 of this bill also defines same, Mr. Speaker. However, the phenomenon of dumping is per se not illegal, even in the 2010 Act, even in this bill. It is not illegal, as it is recognized that producers may sell their goods at different prices to different markets. As at date, Mr. Speaker, we do not also have any study that has been conducted to oversee how dumping has affected our economy or local industry. It would have been an important task or an important piece of information for us to know the extent of dumping in our country. We do not also have any information whether government has approached the players of our local industry to get their views and suggestions with regard to this bill, when we very well know that the major part of our consumable goods are imported goods. Because, why I say so, Mr. Speaker, sir? Because it is also not unusual for prices to vary from time to time in the light of supply and demand conditions. It is also recognized that price discrimination in the form of dumping is a common international commercial practice. It is also not uncommon that the export prices are lower than the domestic prices. Therefore, from the point of view of anti-dumping practices, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing inherently illegal or immoral about the practice of dumping. However, Mr. Speaker, where dumping causes or threatens to cause material injury to the domestic industry of Mauritius, this is where an investigating authority may initiate an investigation and subsequently impose anti-dumping duties. And this is why we need a comprehensive legal framework. And the Trade Anti-Dumping and Countervailing Measures Act 2010 is the legal framework for anti-dumping and countervailing investigations for the levy of anti-dumping and countervailing duties. And Mr. Speaker, this act is based on the relevant WTO agreements that I've mentioned earlier on. And pursuant to those agreements, Mr. Speaker, sir, whatever have been canvassed in this new bill is an extension of what we have in the 2010 bill with regards to even the remedial measures, even with regards to investigation. But what this piece of legislation is bringing more, which I welcome, is the consolidation of the way investigations will be conducted. Because long ago, in the 2010 legislation, it was not clearly mentioned in the Act. It was in the regulations. Now it is being consolidated. But I would invite the Honourable Minister to go a step further. For example, I shall refer to the Australian model. In Australia, Mr. Speaker, this has worked really well. They have implemented not an authority, they did not establish an authority, they established a commission. In the same vein as we have the Competition Commission. So instead of having an authority, they have created an anti-dumping commission. And this anti-dumping commission, you've got professionals, even if you can take people from outside for the very first 3 to 4 years to make it work, and then thereon, they function in a way that they also interact with the industry, with the local industry. It is not just putting an authority just to inquire or just to go and see to it where the fault is. They will create market studies. They will also work with the entrepreneur. And in this same vein, Mr. Speaker, I shall also invite the Honourable Minister to consider at clause 7 with regard to establishment of the authority. If you are maintaining the authority, I'm suggesting instead of authority a commission, but if you are maintaining the authority, to look at the composition of this authority. Why not have a representative from the consumer's side to be there? Why just public servants? Because we are talking about our local business. We are talking about preserving and enhancing the label Made in Maurice. So we need people that consume also to be on this authority. And also, why not a representative from the private sector, Mr. Speaker? Why not a representative from the Mauritius Chamber of Commerce and Industry, for instance, to sit on this authority as well? So these are my suggestions that the Honourable Minister can consider with regards to establishment of this authority, if you're going ahead with the authority. But I would rather prefer the Commission, and if I can invite my Honourable Minister to look at the Australian model. And with regard to clause 115, whereby anyone that feels aggrieved by the decision of the authority, or in other countries a commission, they can go for judicial review. This provision is already there in section 74 of the current legislation, the 2010 Act. But I will go a step further, Mr. Speaker. We all know our judicial system. It takes time to have a case of that nature when you go before the Supreme Court for a judicial review to be heard. So I would ask the Honourable Minister to kindly consider bringing another body in the middle of the authority and the Supreme Court to introduce what we have in other countries, again, the Australian model, an anti-dumping review panel. This anti-dumping review panel, Mr. Speaker, will have people from various strata of the society with regards to business, commerce, and consumer protection. People of high caliber that can be co-opted on this panel so that many dispute resolutions can be called upon before this instance first, find a solution first, and then the last resort you go to court. So in essence, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a good piece of legislation because it consolidates the 2010 legislation and it puts into perspective what we already have as agreement and conventions that Mauritius has ratified. So I invite the Honourable Minister to kindly consider the 3 points I've raised with regard to the setting up of an anti-dumping review panel and also the composition of the authority by introducing people from the business community and from the side of the consumers. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your attention.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, sir. I would like to thank all the honourable members, including Honourable Mohammed, who intervened on the bill and their participation in the debate. Mr. Speaker, sir, just to answer a few points that have been made, I will come to Honourable Mohammed himself. As usual, it was a bit of a pity, Mr. Speaker, sir, because I was anticipating that this bill would carry a consensus in the House, and I am of the opinion it has done so, except for Honourable Mohammed, who as usual has been faithful to himself and has tried to give a political colour to the debates, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is a bit of a pity. As usual, and as usual again, I can't recall exactly what points did he want to make, but I will answer a few of his criticism against this bill. But as usual, the speech of Mr. Honourable Mohammed was like a cup of bad cappuccino, Mr. Speaker, sir. A lot of froth, but little coffee, or hardly any coffee in the cup. Mr. Speaker, sir, the first point that Mr. Honourable Mohammed said, he was arguing that I had misled the House in some way with regard to that point of whether the authority regarding the authority's possibility of initiating an investigation by the authority in the bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, what did I say, in fact? What I said was very clear. I said it is also foreseen that the investigation authority will initiate investigations on its own initiative henceforth, rather than wait for the domestic industry to come forward. This is provided for in the bill. So I never said that for the first time in this present legislation of 2022, that the investigation authority can initiate investigation on its own initiative. I never said that this provision was absent in the 2010 Act, Mr. Speaker. So I never said that. What I said when talking about the new investigating authority, about the new structure and so on, and I said that this authority will initiate investigation on its own initiative henceforth, rather than wait for the domestic industry to come forward. So, Honourable Mohammed was trying to say that I had misled the House, and I said it is now that this authority have this power to initiate investigation. But as I've just pointed out, it is not true, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is a fact that the previous law does provide for this. The point I am making is that with a better structured investigating authority, henceforth, the authority will initiate investigation on its own initiative rather than wait for the domestic industry to come forward. I wanted to clear this point, Mr. Speaker, sir. Now, with regard, Mr. Speaker, sir, to the disclosure of interest. So, the Honourable Member was making a lot of fuss because the law has provided that, I will read what is in the law. If at any time it appears to the chairperson, vice chairperson, or a member of the authority that a matter before him concerns his financial or personal interest, he shall immediately and fully disclose that interest, and so on. So he was quarrelling with the way this provision has been drafted, has been formulated, Mr. Speaker, sir. But it is clear, the law is clear, that the chairperson and the vice chairperson, whenever a matter before them concerns his financial or personal interest, he has to disclose his interest and so on. But in the law of 2010, this provision did not exist, Mr. Speaker, at all. And it is a pity that Mr. Mohammed is not present here. I would have reminded him of same. As usual, once if he ends his speech, he disappears from the House, Mr. Speaker, sir. So I would have reminded him that, okay, he has the right not to agree with the way the provision of this law has been drafted, whatever way the bill has been drafted, but the aim, the objective of this clause is clear. It is a question of disclosing one's interest, whereas in the law of 2010, the investigation, there was no such provision with regard to the investigating authority. Mr. Speaker, sir, what I want to say to the House also, and reiterate that this bill, in fact, is not to introduce barriers to trade, as have been rightly argued by my two friends on this side of the House, and also by Honorable Utim and Honorable Lubin. I think there's a consensus on this. We're all aware, Mr. Speaker, sir, that this bill is not to introduce barriers to trade, but it is rather to take measures to protect our local industry in specific situations that warrant intervention. All these measures, namely anti-dumping, countervailing, and safeguard, are part and parcel of international trade laws and are therefore legitimate. We are simply transposing into national law the legal commitments which Mauritius as a country took at the WTO, Mr. Speaker, sir. And by the same token, we are providing to our domestic industry the necessary trade policy instruments which can be used in situations when they are affected by dump or subsidized imports, and in the event that increased imports cause injury. This can be in the form of a loss of market share, a contraction in the profit margin, changes in the volume of sale, production, productivity, capacity, utilization, and even employment. In that context, Mr. Speaker, sir, I fully share the views expressed by Honorable Utim that we should protect some of the most sensitive industries in our country, such as sugar, garments, wheat, flour, and this is in fact the very object of this bill, and therefore I think we are exactly on the same page. With regard to the comment made by Honorable Utim regarding the appointment of the Vice Chair of the Investigating Authority by the FS, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is to be noted that the bill sets out the profile of the officer. He or she should hold a post at the level of director and be an expert in finance. Mr. Speaker, sir, a point was raised with regard to the protection of protecting our population. Mr. Honorable Utim said that our population should be happy. Why do we have to come with these measures? And it is precisely the case, Mr. Speaker. The bill provides for anti-dumping measures to be taken only if dumping causes material injury to the domestic industry. If it does not cause material injury, that is what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are hurdles, there are conditions. The imposition of anti-dumping duty cannot be justified, and therefore dumping may be welcome. In addition, the bill provides that the interests of consumers will be taken into account during the investigation. So the intention is not to go against the interests of the consumers, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let us be clear on one matter. Our intention is not to arbitrarily raise tariffs, but rather to apply any such measure after the investigation has revealed that the industry is being impacted because of unfair trade practices or a sudden surge in imports. So, Speaker, sir, the parameters, the circumstances under which these measures can be taken are well established. We should always have a balance between market opening and safeguarding our domestic industry in times of need, which by extension means preserving value addition, consolidating our industrial base, and preserving employment. It is also important that during the investigation, interested parties, which includes consumer organizations, will be given the opportunity to submit their views, which obviously will be taken into account. This is also to answer to the last point made by Honorable Lubin, in why didn't we include in the authority the private sector or consumers representative, Mr. Speaker, sir. One must know that during the investigation, interested parties, as I just said, including the consumer organizations, will be given the opportunity to submit their views, which obviously will be taken into account. The bill provides, Mr. Speaker, sir, that public interest should be taken into account before any decision is taken. And we have also included in the investigating authority a representative of the Ministry of Commerce and Consumer Protection to ensure that the consumer perspective is taken fully on board throughout the investigation process. Mr. Speaker, sir, I don't think I have to go much more on the structure of the authority, one thing that also we have to keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the chairperson of the authority, with the approval of the Secretary to Cabinet, may appoint independent professionals or a specialized agency to advise on the conduct of the investigation. The intention is first to ensure that relevant experts from different ministries are roped in to ensure that the technical and the legal parameters are fully adhered to during the investigation. And in complex cases, in particular in anti-dumping and countervailing investigations, the services of independent professionals who have extensive experience in such investigations may be retained. It is crucial, Mr. Speaker, that any investigation is done in strict compliance with the parameters set by the relevant WTO agreements. Otherwise, we run the risk of being challenged by WTO member states concerned and taken to the dispute settlement body of the WTO. Mr. Speaker, sir, capacity building, I have to mention that this is an important issue, and I must inform the House that we have secured the services of an international expert to train officers from the ministries, from different ministries on the conduct of investigations. We have already a pool of officers who have been trained already, and should the need arise for more training, we will certainly look into it, Mr. Speaker, sir. I understand that this gentleman who came to train our officers was one of the best experts in trade remedies internationally, Mr. Speaker. Before I end, sir, there are two things I would like to say. Firstly, on the transparent nature of this legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are a few remarks I wish to make. Firstly, we have the provision in the law with regard to judicial review. We have another provision in the law, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I underline that as one of the 4 differences between our legislation and the one of 2010. This bill ensures transparency through the legal requirement for the minister responsible for international trade to lay a copy of the annual report of the investigating authority before the Assembly. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have also changed the profile, the nature of this investigating authority, and this has been abundantly canvassed during the debates. Mr. Speaker, sir, just to end and to answer to Honorable Lubin to the point he made, with regard to the 2010 legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, there were good provisions. There are many provisions which have been retained in the present legislation. But I must once again say that the difference between our law and the law of 2010 is firstly, Mr. Speaker, sir, that this is, in this new legislation, the first novelty in this new legislation, we are providing for a new trade remedy, that is, safeguard measures have been provided for in this present legislation. Safeguard measures, unlike anti-dumping or anti-subsidization measures, Mr. Speaker, sir, The safeguard measures for the first time have been provided in this legislation. They are emergency actions, as I just said, that can be taken pursuant to the WTO agreement. This is the first difference. The second one is the way in which the new bill differs is the structure, the composition, and the functioning of the investigating authority responsible for investigation. This is the second difference. And the third difference, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that in this bill, all the procedural requirements have been incorporated in the present bill. Unlike the other piece of legislation, we didn't leave them to be governed by regulations. In the 2010 Act, most of these requirements were to be implemented by way of regulations, but in our bill today, all the procedural requirements have been incorporated in the bill. This explains also why there are so many clauses in this bill. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the difference is what I just said a few minutes ago, that this bill ensures transparency through the legal requirement for the minister to lay a copy of the annual report of the investigating authority before the House, Mr. Speaker, sir. And this also is a novelty. A copy of the annual report of the investigating authority should be laid before the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, sir, to conclude, this bill complements our effort to create the best trading conditions for our operators and will safeguard the interests of our domestic industry, whose contribution, as I said, accounts for some 40%, Mr. Speaker, sir, of our GDP. So I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we will continue to open up market opportunities, and we will ensure that the trade policy instruments are in place to protect the domestic industry against competition and unfair trade practice. This was the purpose of this bill, and I now commend the bill to the House, Mr. Speaker, sir.
The question is that the Trade, Anti-Dumping, Countervailing and Safeguard Measures Bill, number 18 of 2020, to be read a second time. Those in favor say aye, those against say no. Ayes have it.
Public Bills Committee stage. Clause 1, short title. Clause 2, interpretation. Clause 3, particular market situation. Clause 4, producer deemed to be related to exporter, importer. Clause 5, meeting of domestic industry. Clause 6, application of Act. Clause 7, establishment of authority. Clause 8, functions of authority. Clause 9, meetings of authority. Clause 10, staff of authority. Clause 11, impartiality and disclosure of interest. Clause 12, annual report. Clause 13, directions by minister. Clause 14, protection from liability. Clause 15, dump product. Clause 16, imposition of anti-dumping measures. Clause 17, determination of normal value based on prices in country of export origin. Clause 18, determination of normal value based on export price to a third country or on constructed value. Clause 19, sale not made in the ordinary course of trade. Clause 20, calculation of cost. Clause 21, non-market economies. Clause 22, determination of export price.
The question is that clause 1 to 22 stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye, those against no. Ayes have it.
Clause 23, comparison between normal value and export price. Clause 24, comparison method. Clause 25, currency conversion. Clause 26, individual dumping margin. Clause 27, imposition of countervailing measures. Clause 28, determination of inquiry. Clause 29, examination of volume of dumped or subsidized imports and their effects on prices. Clause 30, accumulation. Clause 31, examination of impact of dumped or subsidized imports on domestic industry. Clause 32, threat of material injury in relation to dumped or subsidized imports. Clause 33, causal link in relation to dumped or subsidized imports. Clause 34, requirements to impose a safeguard measure. Clause 35, injury and causal link in safeguard investigations. Clause 36, application for anti-dumping or countervailing investigations. Clause 37, evidence and information required in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation application. Clause 38, publication of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation application. Clause 39, withdrawal of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation application before initiation. Clause 40, initiation of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 41, self-initiation of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation.
The questioner that clauses 23 to 41 stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it.
Clause 42, no anti-dumping or countervailing investigation for negligible infringement. Clause 43, public notification of initiation of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 44, disclosure of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation application. Clause 45, application for safeguard investigation. Clause 46, evidence and information required in safeguard investigation application. Clause 47, publication of safeguard investigation application. Clause 48, withdrawal of safeguard investigation application before initiation. Clause 49, initiation of safeguard investigation. Clause 50, self-initiation of safeguard investigation. Clause 51, no safeguard investigation for negligible infringement. Clause 52, public notification of initiation of safeguard investigation. Clause 53, disclosure of safeguard investigation initiation. Clause 54, duration of investigation. Clause 55, customs clearance. Clause 56, confidentiality. Clause 57, sampling. Clause 58, reliance on information available. Clause 59, register of investigation. Clause 60, time frame for anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 61, gathering of information during anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 62, preliminary written arguments in respect of anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 63, preliminary determination in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 64, disclosure of the preliminary investigation in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 65, offer of undertaking.
Question in that clauses 42 to 65 stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it.
Clause 66, acceptance of undertaking. Clause 67, notification of undertaking. Clause 68, continuation of investigation. Clause 69, violation of undertaking. Clause 70, review of undertaking. Clause 71, verification of information in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 72, written arguments in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 73, hearings in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 74, contributions by industrial users and representative consumer organizations. Clause 75, essential facts. Clause 76, final determination in anti-dumping or countervailing investigation. Clause 77, disclosure. Clause 78, time frame for safeguard investigation. Clause 79, gathering of information during safeguard investigation. Clause 80, preliminary written arguments in respect of safeguard investigation. Clause 88, preliminary determination in safeguard investigation. Clause 82, consultations of the preliminary determination in safeguard investigation. Clause 83, verification of information in safeguard investigation. Clause 84, written arguments in safeguard investigation. Clause 85, hearings in safeguard investigation. Clause 86, final determination in investigation safeguard. Clause 87, withdrawal application of the initiation. Clause 88, termination for insufficient evidence, de minimis or negligible volume. Clause 69, public notice of conclusion of investigation without notice of measures. Clause 90, imposition of provisional measures. Clause 91, security for provisional measures.
The question that clauses 66 to 91 stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no.
Clause 92, duration of application of provisional measures.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I move that clause 92 be amended as per the amendment circulated.
The question is that clause 92 be amended as per amendment circulated. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it. Question is that clause 92 as amended stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it.
Clause 93, lesser duty rule. Clause 94, definitive anti-dumping or countervailing duty. Clause 95, refund of duties paid in excess of dumping margin or rate of subsidization. Clause 96, suspension of anti-dumping or countervailing measures. Clause 97, application for anti-dumping or countervailing measures. Clause 98, retroactive application of definitive anti-dumping or countervailing duties. Clause 99, security and definitive anti-dumping or countervailing duty. Clause 100, public interest. Clause 101, form and administration of safeguard measures. Clause 102, Amount of safeguard duty, clause 103. Volume of quota, clause 104. Suspension of safeguard measures, clause 105. Application of safeguard measures, clause 106. Definitive collection of safeguard duties, clause 107. Sunset review, clause 108. Review for change of circumstances, clause 109. New super review, clause 110. Duration of safeguard measures, clause 111. Midterm review, clause 112. Extension review, clause 113. Reapplication of safeguard measure, clause 114. Level of concessions and other obligations, clause 115. Judicial review, clause 116. Offences, clause 117. Regulations, clause 118. Repeal, clause 119. Consequential amendments, clause 120. Commencement.
Question that clauses 93 to 120 stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye, those against say no. Aye. Ayes have it.
Title and enacting clause.
Question is the title and enacting clause stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye, those against say no. Aye. Ayes have it. The final question that to report to the House of the Trade, Anti-Dumping, Countervailing and Safeguard Measures Bill number 18 of 2022 has passed the committee stage with amendment. Those in favour say aye, those against say no. Aye. Ayes have it. Please be seated. Honourable members, I have to report to the House of the Trade Anti-Dumping, Countervailing and Safeguard Measures Bill number 18 of 2022 has passed the committee stage with amendment.
Public bills, third reading.
Speaker, sir, I move that the Trade Anti-Dumping, Countervailing and Safeguard Measures Bill number 18 of 2022 be read as her time and passed.
The question is that the Trade Anti-Dumping, Countervailing and Safeguard Measures Bill number 18 of 2022 be read the third time and passed. Those in favour say aye, those against no. The ayes have it.
Public bills, second reading.
Honourable Jatan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, at the very outset, I wish to commend my colleague, the Honourable Sudesh Kalichan, for coming up with the Occupational and Safety Health Bill and to be able to underline the importance of this bill. Allow me to quote the Director General of the ILO, Mr. Guy Ryder. As the world continues to grapple with the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the uneven recovery, occupational safety and health remains at the forefront of countries' responses. The lessons learned from this crisis about the importance of social dialogue in strengthening safety and health at the national and workplace level need to be applied to other contexts. This would help reduce the unacceptable level of occupational deaths and disease that occur every year, unquote. I wish to outright highlight the fact that a civilized, advanced and caring society is often gauged by the way it treats its workers and employees at all strata of economic and social activities. The health and safety of every single employee, as well as the conducive environment in which he or she operates, are verily of cardinal importance. Mr. Speaker, sir, the exigencies of a globalized economy characterized by greater and greater mass production, where output is more often than not the main thrust of industrial captains, it is the duty and responsibility of a state to ensure that the health and safety of every worker at all levels is being taken care of. Mr. Speaker, sir, on one hand, where the regular introduction of new production techniques at factory floors with new production paradigm geared towards more and more productivity and greater profits, and to a significant extent, the tendency to source cheap and maybe often submissive labor are posing a greater potential health and safety hazards for many workers. This is precisely what the Occupational Safety and Health Bill aims at addressing. And with your permission, Mr. Speaker, sir, I shall delve into its specific clauses a bit later. So while there may be a seemingly deadlier but far less visible source of occupational hazard looming high in the modern workplace, whether in the industrial sector or more specifically in offices, I have to mention that it is about the direct corollary of the new technologies, which keep being updated, improved, and upgraded. From the information and communication technologies of the 80s to the 90s and to today, the world has moved rapidly to smart technologies, which is making gigantic steps towards AI, augmented reality, and virtual reality. And as everyone knows, these new technologies are bringing in the wake new occupational health hazards and are causing fundamental changes in our corporeal behavior and body movements, causing in the process serious health issues. According to experts, digital occupational hazards are becoming far more dangerous than even conventional ones. And I am happy to know and to take note that the Ministry of Labour and Industrial Relations, through a series of measures and also in this bill, is actively tackling these issues. The first thing is the definition of health itself, Mr. Speaker, sir, which I believe is so crucial. So, in line with Article 3E of the Occupational Safety and Health Convention 1981, the definition of health in this bill has been amended to include both physical and mental elements affecting health, which are actually directly related to safety and hygiene at work. So it is with much appreciation that I note that this bill broadens the scope of protection given to the workers. And indeed, workers will now also be provided with professional health services through occupational health physicians. The Occupational Safety and Health Bill has been prepared so as to be in line with the ILO Conventions 155 and 187 as ratified by the government of Mauritius, with a view to promoting continuous improvement of occupational safety and health to prevent any occupational injury, disease, and death. In the same line, the National Occupational Safety and Health Department is being set up with clear objects and functions on which I will elaborate a bit later. Above all, Mr. Speaker, sir, this bill ensures that every employee lives a life full of dignity. We have actually in the past witnessed tears of happiness rolling down the cheeks of those who now benefit from the minimum salary. And it is this government, with the same very able minister, under the leadership of the Honorable Pravin Kumar Jagnnath, who also brought about the negative income tax, the Workers' Rights Bill, the Redundancy Board, and of course before that the Employment Relations Tribunal. I had said it before, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I say it again, but to be able to bring change, to break glass ceilings, this requires boldness, courage, and determination, which only this government has. With the provisions of this bill, workers' representatives will have a crucial role to play in enhancing safety and health standards at the workplace. The employer will now be required to carry out a risk assessment following accident, dangerous occurrence, and occupational disease. With a view to ensuring transparency and cooperation between employers and employees, the employer will be required also to hand over part of the risk assessment report to an employee or his representatives following a request made. This will allow employees to be aware of the hazards to which they are exposed and the precautionary measures that the employers are taking. I have to say here, Mr. Speaker, sir, that as a previous member of the Employment Relations Tribunal, I have myself come across so many cases in the past where, unfortunately, workers' basic rights to hygienic working conditions, sanitary conditions were not provided. And on some work sites, Some employees' lives were even at risk. And there may be so many employees working out on the sites, but who are not provided with a necessary sanitary convenience. This bill is going to change this and will allow for everyone's needs to be catered for. I therefore applaud the measures that this bill brings forward. I believe that members on both sides of the House will agree that a safe working environment is a sine qua non for productivity, and it automatically follows that this bill will lead to enhanced productivity in both the short term and the long term, as both employers and employees are taking responsibility. It is a fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the world of work has been changing and also growing in complexity and technicality over the past decades. But the qualification requirements for safety and health officers has only been a diploma since the 1980s. This bill addresses this crucial issue by changing the qualification of safety and health officers from diploma to a degree in occupational safety and health, thereby ensuring that qualified and competent professionals are advising employers in the field of occupational safety and health. The responsibility of employers towards their staff is enforced in this bill through the new penalty structure proposed, as employers who have occupational accidents, occupational disease, or dangerous occurrences will be subject to stricter fines if convicted. Furthermore, those having specific duties and responsibilities under the Act have a specific penalty clause. It is hereby clear that being a caring and compassionate government, this government, through this bill, places an unavoidable duty of care on both employers and employees to be able to secure health and safety in the place of work, specifying in detail duties of employers who also have the duty to provide a safe working environment where none is exposed to risk of injury or harm to their health. It hence requires the employer to consult, to provide information, instruction, and also to deliver training where necessary, as well as to take all reasonable steps to avoid acts or omissions which can reasonably be foreseen to cause injury. The duties of care are indeed supported by provisions for consultative and participatory mechanisms as detailed in the bill. The bill also provides for the establishment of a national occupational safety and health department, which will be responsible for promoting the ratification and compliance with occupational safety and health conventions of the ILO, as I mentioned earlier, and the continuous improvement of occupational safety and health through enforcement of an up-to-date legislative framework which will be in line with international standards. It will also be proactively engaged in promoting education, training, research, and development in occupational safety and health, as well as conducting sensitization campaigns on occupational health and safety. Sorry, just a technical issue, Mr. Speaker, sir. Back. So, coming back to the bill. As a caring government, our focus is not only the immediate situation only. Through this bill, we wish to be able to bring structural changes to enable us to sustain good occupational health and safety practices over the long term. This bill provides the necessary framework to embed safety into every company, every work site, and for each and every employee. And this can only happen with a strong and pervasive occupational health and safety culture. We see this clearly when we compare the occupational health and safety performance of companies within the same industry. They may be dealing with similar workplace risk or be tapping onto the same profile of employees, but yet some companies have consistently had stellar occupational health and safety track records as compared to the peers. For this bill, our aim is to have a strong occupational safety and health culture. And for this culture to germinate, to grow and to flourish, it must start from the top, with the chief executive and the company directors. This is because they are the ones with influence and control over budgets, over priorities, over strategy, policy, and training. Occupational health and safety considerations have to be entrenched as most important and non-negotiable decisions for organizations. If the chief executive and board can do that by setting the policy and adopting the right decision, they will then be able to ultimately drive good occupational health and safety practices on the ground, as well as encouraging participation of all those who share the same work environment. And through this, we will have a good work environment culture which will be fostered and encouraged. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to take some time to focus on Section 32 of the bill, which is being amended following several complaints from candidates for what we call boiler and machinery inspection, because of the perceived conflict of interest at the level of the Boiler and Machinery Inspectors Board, given that the chairperson and assessors were practicing registered boiler. So to comply with the recommendations of the Independent Commission Against Corruption, there has been a review of the composition of the board to promote transparency and accountability. And as per the advice of the State Law Office, there has also been a change in terms of number of members, since no quorum was specified in Section 32 of the OSHA 2025. Moreover, there is also the decision to appoint an alternate assessor in the absence of one assessor by the minister. There are also consultations being held with the Ministry of National Infrastructure and Community Development and the Institution of Engineers in the country. As I come to the conclusion, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have to say that we need to recognize that a turbulent period is prevalent as we continue to battle work pressures and uncertainties. But we cannot and we must never let it be an excuse to neglect good occupational health and safety practices. It is paramount that organizations understand the need to be safe and how occupational health and safety is aligned to the commercial interest. Our message through this bill to all the employers, all the directors of organizations out there is that all businesses will be more sustainable if high occupational health and safety standards are maintained. We can attract and retain talent, given the strong reputation for looking after the health and safety of our staff. So if disruptions are avoided following accidents, and also if there are work orders which are stopped or debarred from hiring foreign employees, this has repercussions. So business sustainability built on the safety and health of workers is important. The gist here, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that health and safety does not need to be a trade-off for productivity. It doesn't need to be a compliance cost. It can just be an investment that will in turn contribute to return positive economic and social benefits for all. So I hereby request all members of this August Assembly to support this bill and strengthen the occupational health and safety framework in the country. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Président, le bien-être et la sécurité de nos compatriotes sur leur lieu de travail est une des grandes priorités de ce gouvernement. Nous croyons fermement que chaque citoyen de ce pays, chaque individu qui contribue à l'économie nationale, chacun à sa manière et selon ses capacités, mérite d'être amplement protégé. Depuis son accession au pouvoir, ce gouvernement a fait preuve de compassion envers les vulnérables et surtout envers ceux qui sont exposés aux risques et aléas de toutes sortes. Nous n'avons plus besoin de faire preuve à cet égard. Nos actions en sont amplement éloquentes. C'est dans cette optique que ce gouvernement, à travers le ministre de l'Emploi et des Relations industrielles aujourd'hui, présente ce projet de loi pour protéger davantage nos citoyens. En dépit de ce que disent les honorables membres de l'autre côté de la Chambre, ce gouvernement, sous la férule du Premier ministre Pravin Kumar Jagnnath, continuera dans cette même voie qu'il a entreprise depuis 2014, c'est-à-dire une voie vers le progrès de notre peuple, vers l'avancement du pays et surtout vers la protection tout azimut de ses citoyens. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, sir, at the very outset, allow me to congratulate Honorable Suivez Kalichern, Minister of Labour, Human Resource Development and Training, and Minister of Commerce and Consumer Protection for coming up with the Occupational Safety and Health Amendment Bill, which will no doubt bring revolutionary changes in the OSH landscape. Mr. Speaker, sir, this bill is yet another tangible evidence that since its coming into power, the MSM-led government is leaving no stone unturned to introduce measures aiming at bringing innovation regarding the different economic sectors and at the same time provide the necessary legal framework to ensure the well-being and security of our fellow citizens. And talking about well-being and security, the measures introduced obviously caters for workers, be it locals or foreign workforce. The House and the population at large will recall that in 2019, government through the Ministry of Labour came up with the Employment Relations Amendment Bill, which promotes harmonious industrial relations between workers, trade unions, and employers. And today, with the Occupational Health and Safety Amendment Bill, we are making another great leap towards a better and safer working environment. Globalement parlant, Monsieur le Président, que serait le monde sans la santé et sans la sécurité? Cette question, nous pouvons aussi la poser autrement. Que serait le monde du travail à Maurice si les centaines de milliers de travailleurs qui opèrent dans les différents secteurs n'avaient aucune garantie concernant la santé et la sécurité au travail? Je suis certain que nous pouvons tous imaginer dans quelle situation chaotique nous nous serions retrouvés. En passant, je voudrais saluer l'initiative fort louable du ministère de la fonction publique qui a récemment procédé au lancement de Health Promotion Clubs dans différents ministères et départements de la fonction publique. Cela afin d'avoir une main-d'œuvre en bonne santé et accroître la productivité. Mais pour en revenir au présent projet de loi qui est débattu dans cette Chambre aujourd'hui, Monsieur le Président, il est vraiment dommage de constater que malgré les nombreuses dispositions en place pour assurer les meilleures conditions de travail possibles aux travailleurs à Maurice, nous sommes témoins très souvent d'incidents malheureux sur les sites de travail. Quand un père, une mère ou n'importe quel membre de la famille quitte la maison pour aller travailler, son souhait est de rentrer à la maison sain et sauf, et non de finir à l'hôpital. Et pire, imaginez le sentiment d'une famille qui a vu l'un des siens sortir pour gagner son pain et qu'au final, c'est un cadavre qui revient à la maison suite à un accident de travail. Malheureusement, Monsieur le Président, c'est une dure réalité à laquelle de nombreuses familles ont eu à faire face. D'ailleurs, à quelques jours seulement de la présentation de l'Occupational Safety and Health Amendment Bill en première lecture, nous avons enregistré un énième cas d'accident de travail qui a coûté la vie à un de nos compatriotes qui travaillait sur un chantier. C'est une famille mauricienne, de plus, qui est affligée par un tel drame qui aurait pu être évité. Selon les informations qui étaient disponibles suite à ce malheureux accident, malgré les dispositions de l'Occupational Safety and Health Safety of Scaffolds Regulations, il semble que l'échafaudage duquel la victime est tombée était constitué de tuyaux en métal fixés dans un mur en béton et scellés avec des morceaux de bois. On se souviendra également que quelques semaines plus tôt, le pays avait également enregistré un autre décès lié à un accident de travail, cette fois dans la zone portuaire. Et comme cela, il y a tant d'exemples qui peuvent être cités. Et n'oublions pas les milliers d'étrangers qui viennent travailler dans notre pays, qu'ils soient venus à Maurice par choix ou par obligation, suite à des situations difficiles dans leur pays. Il est de notre devoir de leur assurer toute la protection voulue afin que leur santé et leur sécurité au travail ne soient pas mis en péril. Car il est un fait que nous aurions souhaité qu'il en soit de même pour nos compatriotes qui vont travailler à l'étranger. Nous devons dire stop aux accidents de travail. Une vie perdue ou une blessure suite à un accident de travail est un cas de trop. Et c'est aussi une famille de plus qui est brisée, anéantie. Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, si nous prenons comme exemple le secteur de la construction, nous pouvons sans nul doute affirmer que Maurice est un vaste chantier, avec des projets entrepris par le gouvernement et le secteur privé. Et il va sans dire que nous voyons la construction de structures de plus en plus grandes et élevées, ce qui nécessite évidemment des mesures additionnelles pour renforcer davantage la sécurité de ceux qui sont impliqués dans ces travaux. Parallèlement, il y a également ces autres secteurs d'activité où les employés sont appelés à manipuler des objets, des outils, des équipements et des substances qui peuvent être considérés comme étant dangereux pour la santé et la sécurité. Les lois et les règlements sont là, mais il faut constamment les améliorer de sorte à ce qu'ils soient en phase avec les changements majeurs que connaît le monde du travail. Hence, Mr. Speaker, sir, as rightly pointed out in the explanatory memorandum of the present bill, the Republic of Mauritius cannot lag behind in terms of conformity with the fundamental conventions on occupational safety and health of the International Labour Organization. The aim, spelled out through the amendments being brought through the Occupational Safety and Health Amendment Bill, clearly demonstrate that for this government, safety and health at work is priceless, that the life of workers matters to us, and that we shall not skip on the means to provide the best conditions to our workforce. We are therefore glad to note that major regulations are being introduced to cater for greater safety on working sites. Paragraph 5 calls upon to repeal Section 7 of the Principal Act with the new legislation which stipulates that in cases where total power used or generated by machinery installed at a place of work exceeds 750 kilowatts, the employer is bound to employ a registered professional engineer to be in general charge of all such machinery. And if the power used or generated by machinery installed is less than 750 kilowatts, a competent person shall be in general charge of the machinery. Moreover, the 9th schedule to the Principal Act, where some 40 substances that are hazardous to health are already listed, is being amended, and additional substances such as dibutyl phthalate, glycol ethers, isocyanates, leather dust arising from manufacturers' activities, methyl N-butyl, ketone, N-hexane, sodium bisulfides, and toluene are being included. Mr. Speaker, sir, moreover, in this fast-evolving world of work and the numerous challenges which are emerging, we should commend the Ministry of Labour, Human Resource Development and Training for the laudable initiative of setting up the National Occupational Safety and Health Department and the computerization of the services of this body. It is also worth underlining that once enacted, the new reinforced legislation will, through the National Occupational Safety and Health Department, help to further promote the ratification and compliance with occupational safety and health conventions of the International Labour Organization. And I'm sure that the cooperation with international organizations will be a plus to propel the local occupational safety and health culture to new heights. Mr. Speaker, sir, to prevent recurrence of complex accidents where the risks are not well understood and have the potential for serious harm and could be present in other companies, we need to ensure timely sharing of learnings from the investigation into such accidents. The learnings are needed not just to raise awareness of safety and health risk, but to provide recommendations on how to eliminate or mitigate the risk. We believe timely and early sharing of case facts and recommendations with industry is important to prevent recurrence in line with paragraph 10, clause 23b, subsection B and D of the bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, we should not allow our workers' lives to be determined by luck. We need to take a tougher deterrent stance and prosecute them. Clause 24C of the bill will therefore raise the maximum penalty from 5,000 to 10,000 rupees for the employee and 75,000 to 150,000 rupees for the employer. The penalties will be calibrated based on factors such as the culpability of the offender, the severity of harm that could have resulted, and the likelihood of harm. This will undeniably help the Republic of Mauritius to relentlessly improve occupational safety and health at work through the implementation of an up-to-date legislative framework in line with international standards. Therefore, we can rest assured that with activities and other initiatives deemed fit by the Department and the Ministry of Labour, people will get more and more acquainted with the national safety and health culture. The more so because the National Occupational Safety and Health Department will also be mandated to promote education, training, research and development in occupational safety and health. Additionally, this department will also be entrusted with the responsibility of establishing the relevant mechanism to collect and analyze data related to occupational accidents and diseases. Mr. Speaker, sir, last but not least, the last decade has taught us that all workplace injuries and ill health are preventable with the full commitment of every stakeholder, employers, workers, union, and government. We need a stronger emphasis on preventing harm from ever occurring. No harm to people. Prevention is key to achieving safe and healthy workplaces for everyone. There are areas where we can strengthen the culture of prevention. We need to prevent the occurrence of unsafe work practices and health risks at work. Understand and encourage good behavior. Should an accident happen, we need to prevent its recurrence, especially for accidents that are complex involving risks that are not well understood and have the potential for serious harm. We need to prevent workplace safety and health training courses from being outdated. Knowledge and practical ability to empower people with more confidence. Monsieur le Président, en prenant en considération les amendements apportés à l'Occupational Safety and Health Act, nous pouvons dire que la boucle est bouclée, car il y a des mesures qui favorisent un accroissement de la culture de la santé et de la sécurité des employés et leur épanouissement, des provisions pour mieux guider et encadrer les employeurs et également des paramètres et autres exigences à être respectées par les différents partenaires et prestataires de services associés au monde du travail. Nous ne pouvons que souhaiter que les choses se mettent vite en place et que nous commencions à voir des changements prononcés dans tout ce qui a trait à l'environnement du travail d'ici peu de temps. Vive la République de Maurice. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
With these words, I suspend the sitting for 1 hour.